So let's talk about sex.
With you? Do I have to?
Actually, let's talk about sex education, which is just as fun.
You are really not selling me on this.
If I think about one of my earliest memories about sex education, it was in the 5th grade. The teachers were really nervous. They broke us up into boys and girls. And as a boy, I was put in one room. We watched a really poorly animated video about puberty and wet dreams. And then we got a travel-sized deodorant, and were sent back to class.
Well, that's because boys are stinky. It's all of that toxic masculinity seeping through our skin.
All I remember is being jealous. Why was I jealous? Because the girls got a paper bag of goodies. Now, I had no idea what they had. Turns out it was deodorant, a pad, and a tampon. I didn't know what those were for because we didn't learn.
Oh, so you mean you were not taught about biological and reproductive processes that don't apply to you since you're male. Got it.
But I was just jealous and confused and then just went back to class. As a sex health educator now, this is an experience I keep with me of what not to do.
You are a sex health educator now. And now you know what not to do. Go on.
That lesson, that introduction to sex education, was not inclusive at all. They broke us up into binary genders. We didn't learn anything about other genders or other sexes. And then there was no follow-up. We got deodorant.
You are a sex health educator now, and you're complaining that you weren't taught about other genders and other sexes. Well, do tell us, O educator, what is the name of the third biological sex? And do tell us, as a sex health educator, of what value is there in going over other genders and other sexes when describing to children the biological facts about one's genitalia and their function and purpose in the process of human reproduction. I am dying to know.
And that's something that I strive for. I strive for inclusive, queer-inclusive, trans-inclusive sex education in my work.
You are a sex health educator now. Sexual orientation and sexual dimorphism have what to do with the function of genitalia in the process of human reproduction?
One of the reasons that sex education is not inclusive, though, is an idea that I like to call compulsory reprosexuality.
I am glad you like to call it that. It sounds very academic. You also make it sound like a pejorative.
That's a big theory term, but break it down for you. Compulsive is mandatory, and reprosexuality, reproduction. Basically, it's a cultural notion that we're all expected to, or it's the norm to reproduce.
Oh, so you're here to tell us that human reproduction is not normal? Or it should not be classified as normal? Got it?
So we all know this as a really common nursery rhyme. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes baby in the baby carriage.
Well, you kind of forgot to specify which two icky breeders are the ones Kissing in the tree, but okay.
That line of thought and that narrative is something that's often used against people or to discipline people.
What?
As somebody myself who doesn't want to reproduce, because I have lots of kids because I teach and I like to go home alone.
Oh, you don't want to reproduce, therefore a desire to reproduce should not be taught to kids as something that is normal. Got it.
I often get from students and other adults, you don't want to have kids? And it's like, no, I'm fine. But there's a bit of a judgment there. And when people say, oh, I don't want to have children, that can ruin a would-be grandmother's day. Or mother-in-law going, hey, where are my grandkids? Or a father going, where am I going to have a grandkid to have fun with?
Oh my God. What a punishment. That someone else might be disappointed that you've decided not to breed. The horror. The horror. So let us all change our societal thinking and outlook to prevent you from feeling mildly uncomfortable.
When it comes to sex education, though, this infiltrates in a lot of really problematic ways for inclusion.
Problematic. Check.
Because if we think of sex education like this, that model doesn't fit everybody.
I think you will find that that model fits quite well with the concept of human reproduction. One's personal choices regarding reproduction does not change the facts about how it works. And that's what sex ed is pretty much all about. It's about facts, not feelings. But you are a sex health educator now.
Now, how that fits into sex education is that we often talk about sex education, and my job is funded by a grant for teen pregnancy prevention. So the idea of preventing teen pregnancies is itself also a problem, because teens and youth have the right to make decisions about their own reproductive health. So what we're actually doing is trying to educate for unintended pregnancies, pregnancies that are mistimed or not wanted. Like, I didn't know that was going to happen.
Right. You're meant to teach kids about how sex and sexual reproduction works so that they can be more informed before making potentially bad choices for themselves. But that's just not enough for our speaker, it seems. All right, do tell us how the purpose for which you receive funding is inadequate to your agenda.
But in the meantime, when we do these programs, many of these programs are given to us from different places. They focus on heterosexual penis and vagina relating to reproduction sex. That's considered the norm.
Penis and vagina sex is how you reproduce. It is the norm because it is how it works outside of a fertility clinic or certain mythological belief systems. Unless our speaker is aware of another method of human reproduction that the rest of us are simply not privy to, or is our speaker just not a fan of heterosexual sex?
So if that's considered the norm, we don't get to talk about a whole lot of other sexual acts, the whole spectrum.
You want to talk to children about the whole spectrum of sexual acts outside of the relatively bland mechanics of human reproduction. Got it.
So I do a program, and this has happened to me. I tend to have really outspoken youth, which is great, and I'll have a youth who's a self-identified lesbian go, hey, this doesn't matter to me. I'm a lesbian. I don't picture myself having sex with somebody with a penis ever. And that's their worldview, that's their identity. And so yeah, if I'm talking about external condoms and birth control, this isn't relating to them.
I don't have any real use for geometry in my everyday adult life. Yet, I still had to take it in school. Sometimes you learn things that you don't end up needing to know in life. Them's the breaks. And didn't our speaker say at the top of this presentation how his intention was to include everyone in sex education, regardless of who they are or what they think or how their body operates? Funny how he sounds like he's going back against that principle so very quickly.
And you may think, Well, maybe she has a point. She's not necessarily thinking about having sex that could lead to reproduction. So why does she need to learn it? Maybe she should have some other kind of sex education. That brings up some issues for me about separate but equal. We'll put that aside because that's a problem.
What are you talking about? You are a sex health educator now, and you're arguing that educating kids on sexual reproduction is an insult? It's unnecessary if a child says that they are a lesbian? If you have a child telling you that they're a lesbian in grade school, that they've determined their sexual orientation before they've even hit puberty, you might want to talk to their parents, not give them a waiver from having to take sex ed.
Instead, we also have to admit that queer youth do have unintended pregnancies. And you may go, really?
Nope, I don't go, really? Because queer youth have that operative term in there. Youth, which means that they are growing and exploring and bound to make mistakes. And so isn't that an argument for requiring sex ed for all children, regardless of their declared lack of heterosexuality?
But there are many instances where a queer youth might have sex that results in a pregnancy. For example, if somebody's dealing with internalized homophobia, they may act and do certain things, they may have certain kinds of sex that they don't want, but to be perceived as heterosexual, or to be perceived as themselves as heterosexual.
So we need to change society's views on sexuality so that a gay kid doesn't decide to have unsafe sex, which they didn't learn about because sex ed doesn't apply to them, but that we should teach to them even if our speaker thinks pee-pee and hoo-ha sex is yucky. Do I got it?
So all it takes is that one time, somebody, a gay man perhaps, takes a girl out for prom, does some stereotypical acts. Just that one time, you have an unintended pregnancy. There are also times when people just feel forced socially into that. We also have to admit that queer youth are often the subject of different oppressions and disparities. So they may have to result or go into sex work, trading sex for money.
What? Now we're talking about prostitution? You are a sex health educator now. You're meant to teach kids about sexual reproduction in order to help decrease unwanted teenage pregnancies. What does any of that have to do with the possibilities of a gay kid becoming a prostitute?
Or survival sex, trading sex for some sort of shelter or some sort of food, protection.
Okay, I officially have no idea where this is going now. Which is really entertaining, honestly.
And queer youth, especially transgender women and transgender women of color, are often targeted for sexual assault and rape. These are all potential acts that could lead to pregnancy, but definitely not on the radar of somebody who might self-identify as gay or lesbian. And definitely not something that maybe people even want to happen.
What? Unwanted pregnancy, whatever the cause, isn't something that anyone wants to happen. That's why it is called unwanted.
So in these cases, what should we do?
I have no idea. Please, please, educate me.
Well, for the self-identified lesbian in the class, this doesn't relate to her. If I'm just talking about a penis and vagina sex model, it does not relate. And if there's one big education faux pas, it's if you don't teach something that relates to somebody's personal experience, there is no way for it to be incorporated into their knowledge.
A big educational faux pas. If you don't teach something that relates to someone's personal experience, then there is no way for it to be incorporated into their knowledge. Yes, like when I learned about the gravity on the moon, or the German language, or how cells divide, or the events that led up to the American Civil War. None of these things related to my personal experience, thus none of it became incorporated into my knowledge. Got it.
And so if somebody's worldview is, this is the kind of sex I'm having, this is how I am, this is who I am as a person, it's not going to land. Personal experience. Starting college, I go online, because online tells all the answers. How to have anal sex safely. Is that something I learned in class? Is that something I should have learned in class? I would say so.
You want to teach children in a sex ed class about human reproduction meant to decrease teen pregnancy how to have safe anal sex. Well, that would certainly cut down on teen pregnancy, and I am sure that the parents of the small children under your care will appreciate it when they learn how you taught their kids how best to ass fuck.
If I want to be able to have safe sexual encounters, my sex ed program should provide that information. And considering that I was a sponge in school, I did not get that at all, so I'm pretty sure it wasn't there.
Please, please do not tell us about your first awkward experience with anal sex. Please don't.
But that also is making me, I'm maybe a little bit weird.
You weird? Nah.
Because I'm looking up how to do things safely. That's not on the forefront of people's minds. That's not on the forefront of a youth's mind about to engage in sexual contact or sexual intercourse.
So you're here to change all of that. Got it.
And so, including a variety of sex acts, including the spectrum of sex identity, of gender identity, is going to be able to include LGBTQ youth. But it's also going to include everybody else. Because do heterosexual people just have penis and vagina sex?
You're asking if heterosexuals only have penis and vagina sex. For the sake of sexual reproduction? Yes. For the sake of entertainment and variety? Not necessarily. But so what? Are you saying that sex ed in schools should include classes on the correct way to give head? Or how to safely use a strap-on? Or how to best tongue butter a turtle cave? What exactly are you proposing?
No. Some people do, but there's many other sexual acts that people have that maybe there's something to learn about safety. Maybe there's something to learn about pleasure. Maybe there's something to learn about how to do it better.
Yes, I cannot wait for the day when grown adults are teaching grade schoolers how to perfect their blowjob techniques. It'll be an absolute utopia.
So this idea of queering sex ed is going to be good for everybody, because reducing sex to a biological function removes everything that makes it human to us.
The act of sex is a biological function. A function of hormones, brain chemistry, and genetics. You are a sex health educator now. Got it.
So I have a couple things that I think we can do to try to work on this problem. I'm a sex health educator, so I try to do it on my own, but we need everybody. The first is thinking about why we don't talk about sex.
You are a sex health educator now. You are paid through a grant to teach kids about sexual reproduction to help reduce teen pregnancy. Teen pregnancy has been on the decline year over year across the board for the last 25 years. We do talk about sex. We're just apparently not talking to children about sex acts in a way that our speaker would prefer. Also, that echo happening at this point in the video is part of the original recording. There's nothing I can do about it, I'm afraid.
In our culture, we have a lot of puritanical roots in the United States culture, and those often make sex seem dirty or immoral. And we need to acknowledge that those things can cause shame and stigma when people want to talk about sex. Second, we need to talk about pleasure. If we talk about sex and we don't talk about that some people do it for pleasure, anybody who has had sex for pleasure is not going to relate to it. They're going to go, what's this person talking about? That's just functions. This is something else I'm doing over here. So they're not going to connect to it. They're not going to relate to it.
You are a sex health educator now. Are your grade school students having sex for pleasure? Are you afraid of alienating your sexually active grade schoolers by talking about the boring process of human sexual reproduction? Is it important to give children a masterclass on how to orgasm harder and longer? What the hell are you talking about?
And third, I really encourage everybody to be advocates for sex education. As somebody who's worked with principals, administrators, and teachers, they're often very scared about what parents, guardians, and the community are going to do.
Well, given what it seems like you are advocating for them to allow to be taught in their schools, I do not blame them at all.
You know, somebody wants to teach sex health in a health class, and the first thing is, what are the parents going to think? Are they going to riot? So as parents, guardians, community members, what is being taught in your schools? What is being taught to the youth and the people that are growing up and becoming part of the community around you? So those three things: talk about why we don't talk about it, talk about pleasure, and talk about what is being taught and how can you advocate for an inclusive sex ed. And to me, that's a really great way for having queer sex ed for all. Thank you.
Okay, that applause started a bit too quickly for me not to think it was artificially inserted into the recording. And I can't imagine why. I mean, preaching that we need to alter society from thinking that heterosexual sex is the norm, that a desire for human reproduction should be denigrated and discouraged, that children should be taught the entire sex act spectrum. I mean, why wouldn't grown adults be jumping for joy at the prospect of such a thing? Now, to be clear, I am not at all opposed to preteen children being taught the facts on how to have safe sex in order to avoid pregnancy and disease. The health science behind safe sex today is light years beyond what even I was taught so many moons ago, and I think that's a good thing. But what we have here is someone with an ideology to push, along with a notion of telling children what is and is not pleasurable, what is and is not normal, according to him. Having as robust a knowledge of the basics of safe sex is a vital starting point for someone to begin exploring their own sexuality. Their own sexuality, not whatever a sex ed teacher thinks kids should think about their sexuality. I have to say, this has got to have been one of the most bewildering and cringy TEDx talks I have ever watched. And I truly, truly hope that our speaker's ideas for sex education, professed on that stage, go no further than the walls of that auditorium. As always, thank you for watching.